For the joy of it. Readings from the unpublished autobiography of John W. Duarte, along with photos and videos representing his musical life. My maternal grandfather, William John Greenhoff, was an engineer who emigrated to the USA sometime in the 1880s. He was born in 1863, to seek a better life for his Lancastrian wife Lizzie and himself. His search was successful, and my mother was born in Philadelphia, USA in 1890. Working for Waygood Otis, makers of lifts or elevators, the family lived in New York, Chicago, Scranton, and somewhere in Texas, finally being stationed in Bahia, Brazil, as superintendent of construction in South America. There my mother married a well-born Brazilian whose surname was Belfort Duarte. He died at an early age, preceded by their son Mario, a sibling of whom I know nothing beyond a photograph of his grave. It was during the wartime years in London that my mother had an affair with John McLagan, a married commissioned officer in the London Scottish Regiment, which is how I came into this world. It is only in the last few decades that illegitimate birth has ceased to be a serious social stigma, and it is from chronic habit that I have continued to respond to inquiries about the origin of my surname by saying there is no Latin blood in my veins, that my father was a Scot, and that Duarte is both a Portuguese and Scottish name, usually without the E, all of which is true. I was therefore brought up by my mother and maternal grandparents, and I never knew my natural father or any of his kin. It is safe to predict that those among the many I have alienated along life's path, for whom no joke is too obvious to resist, will not hesitate to accept a free gift. I always knew he was a bastard. My early years were marked by a comprehensive absence of any interest in music. Efforts to interest me in the piano failed miserably, so it did not seem to be the answer to my musical prayers. A well-meaning relative had presented me with a ukulele, my response to which had been to remove its strings and to consign it to a corner. It so happened that one of our friends, Roy Ellis, was a cabinet maker by trade and an amateur player of the banjolele, and he was asked to restore my ukulele to usable condition and to teach me to play it. I learned to play from window diagrams, and though they meant little to me at the time, chord symbols, and I can still remember the first accompaniment I was taught, though I have no memory of the tune itself. The chords for "Whistle and Blow Your Blues Away" are graven in my memory. By the end of the summer of 1935, I had become so proficient that the family decided to buy me a good ukulele. In September, my mother and I went for a brief holiday in Blackpool, staying with relatives, one of whom was Gerald Smith, a cousin by marriage who played the guitar in Bertini's Tower Ballroom Orchestra. We set out to buy the new instrument, but on the way Jerry said to me, "The ukulele isn't a musical instrument. Let's use the money to buy a cheap guitar, and I'll show you what to do with the other two strings." We thus returned with a pin bridge flat top guitar that cost 25 shillings, £1.25. And I vividly remember waking up the next morning and seeing this wondrous thing propped up against the bedroom wall. It was, for no good reason, christened Little Nell, and I still have it. Ida Presti was one of the famous people who played it in 1965, before its neck warped sufficiently to make it just about unusable. Jerry did what he promised. I learned how to extend numerous nut-positioned chords across all 6 strings, but this was clearly no more than the first step on a long ladder. Thus, when we returned to Manchester, it was decided that I should have a teacher, and the logical place to look for one at that time was at Manchester's leading music store, Mamelock Brothers on Oxford Road. On the first day I sat in the shop, clutching my guitar, and was approached by Terry Usher, who, the Stanley to my Livingstone, said, "Mr. Duarte, I presume." It was at that point that my serious involvement with music began. My lessons with Terry Usher lasted for about 18 months and were sporadic. From the beginning, he laid the foundations of a sound plectrum guitar technique and taught me to read and understand music, not merely to grasp the minimal basics, and to work from chord symbols. For these and other things I am still grateful to him. Whilst many teachers, even today, seek to maintain their position of superiority over their pupils, Terry made no effort to do so. On the contrary, he gave me every encouragement and assistance. He repeatedly told me, and everyone else within earshot, that I would rapidly overtake him, and later that I had done so. He was the first of several people who expressed greater faith in my abilities than I possessed at the time, and who pushed me through doors I might otherwise have been too diffident to enter. I entered the world of music as a jazz musician, at a time when the guitarists' gods were Eddie Lang, Carl Kress, Dick McDonough, Teddy Bunn, Lonnie Johnson, Alan Reese, and bursting like a bombshell in the late 1930s, Django Reinhardt. One of the most important things that set jazz apart from other musics was, and still largely is, the vital role of improvisation, extemporization, though it was of course an essential ingredient in pre-classical music. I never even dreamt of becoming a virtuoso player, but thanks to Terry, I did develop an ability to improvise. It was, I think, sometime in the winter of 1935-6 that I did my first gig, playing chords with a 5-piece band in a local church hall. Then in the first term of the 1936-7 academic year, I began my university studies. The serious business was mixed with a certain quantity of cakes and beer, which included the regular lunchtime dance in the common room, for which the music was provided by the Varsity Vamps, a rag-bag of instrument-wielding students of which I was a part. The Philharmonic Society of Guitarists, the PSG, was formed in 1929 by Dr. Boris Perrott, a Russian émigré living in Barons Court, West London. He was a doctor, a heart specialist, and a guitarist who had performed before the imperial court of Tsar Nicholas II in 1904. He was for a time Julian Bream's teacher, but Julian owed far more to his encouragement and the help he received from the PSG than to the old-fashioned technique that the kindly Dr. Perrott espoused. Pastorale Op.2 No.1 was written in 1945 at the request of Dr. Perrott. This simple piece was for the strugglers.